As a perk on my Patreon, the second tier gets to vote on what movies they want me to watch and make videos about, but seeing as my community is not in any sort of flourish right now, I get my recommendations from those in my social media bubble. In late September, I was assaulted by this tweet by someone I generally think has great and thoughtful opinions. As always, I try to revise my opinions on things over time so that I'm ever evolving and improving, and this take was so jarring that I decided to do a video on it. And that video is coming. But in the process of refreshing myself on the movie Escape Room Tournament of Champions, I stumbled upon something even more interesting to discuss. When I went to rewatch Tournament of Champions, something felt off. The scenes were coming and going faster than I expected, which happens sometimes when you rewatch a movie a second time as you know what's coming, but this was different than that. On my first watch, the acting and color grading of the film was laughably bad, and the pacing was so strange that once they'd escaped their first challenge, I felt kind of tired, like I'd already watched a full movie and everyone ought to be a bit, deader. At first, I chucked my new tolerance for the film up to experiencing it a second time, but things were generally passing smoother along, and I realized, finally, that scenes were missing. Once the last third of the movie came around, it was clear I was not watching the same movie that I'd seen before. The first time that I watched Escape Room Tournament of Champions, I had unknowingly seen the extended cut, and the second time I watched it, I'd sat down with the theatrical version. I didn't know there were two different movie cuts, and that, by all means, is my fault, but there's something to be said for how vastly different they are. Not only does the theatrical cut not include as many scenes, those removed scenes are a whole other plot line. Not a side plot line, mind you, but the plot that concludes the movie and sets it up for the direction of a possible sequel. Whole other scenes and completely different endings were filmed for each of the movies. If you want to watch either Escape Room Tournament of Champion movies, I'm going to say how each of them ended, so click away before that. But since I'm talking about them now, I might as well rate them. And I give the extended cut of Escape Room Tournament of Champions a 1 out of 5, because although they are not terrible movies, they had very little about them that kept my attention or made me root for the characters. They are fun enough, but a bunch of people bumbling around and yelling at each other in an escape room is not endearing to me. If you have a soft spot for escape rooms, you might like it more than me. Speaking of which, I did my first escape room between watching these movies and filming this, and I won, so it's not like I don't get the appeal. The whole thing just felt a little bit very predictable B-movie. And the theatrical cut, I guess I'll give a 2.5 out of 5, because it opened a lot more speculative options about the world of Escape Room to consider, but then it answered none of them. Now, let's talk about the different endings. In the extended cut, there's a plotline between the characters trying to survive the escape rooms of the young girl that makes the rooms. She's, for whatever reason, such a genius at making escape rooms that her father has decided to lock her up and force her to produce them so he can get paid by whatever dark web society is out there paying to see the results, as exposed by the first movie. What the father doesn't know, however, is that the girl has left clues in the rooms to guide Zoe to her to help her, ironically, also escape her room. The movie ends on the ominous note that the girl was never a good guy, she was just manipulating the board to get what she wants, and we can expect better, more terrible escape rooms designed by her in the implied sequel. In the theatrical version of Tournament of Champions, this plotline does not exist. At all. When Zoe makes it to the end of the acid room, she is instead plopped into a child's playroom and reunited with a character that she presumed was dead from the last movie. Her friend tells her the masterminds behind the twisted games want Zoe to become a puzzle maker for them. In classic dramatic movie fashion, Zoe rejects the proposal, blows up the room, saves her friends, and they all escape. After reporting everything to the police, Zoe decides to face her fear of flying, and her and Ben get on a plane back home, when in the last moments of the movie they think to themselves, wasn't this just a little too easy? Overthrowing such a rich, seemingly all-powerful organization that somehow built and hid these extravagant deadly game rooms in and under a fully functioning city? Zoe then sees her therapist in one of the plane seats who seems to not recognize her. Her mind flashes to a bunch of clues scattered throughout the movie aligned with their experiences. Then the foot finally falls, the airplane becomes unstable, and we end on a voice telling Zoe that she's still in the game. The reason I want to talk about these two versions of Tournament of Champions is because I can't tell whether having these entirely different endings is a good thing, because one leaves an open invitation for a sequel and the other cuts itself off from one. The theatrical cut ends on the assumption that the escape rooms are an eternal, inescapable struggle for Zoe, which we don't need to see to know is a horrific fate and shall continue until she breaks to become one of their puzzle makers. It's a conclusive ending where we don't know exactly what's going to happen to her, but we don't need to assume, and the fear of somehow ending up in Zoe's situation ourselves is all the more terrifying of a prospect. The extended cut, however, ends on the promise of more extravagant, deadly rooms made by the puzzle maker Girl Genius. It's not just leaving itself open to a sequel, it's basically announcing one. There was some entertainment value in watching both of the versions of Tournament of Champions, as there were slight variations and Easter eggs between the two. In the extended cut that doesn't end with Zoe trapped on a plane, we see them use that plane on other people. You know, shit like that, where if X didn't happen in this version, then Y did. That said, where does that leave viewers for a sequel? If there is a sequel, one whole movie is now completely obsolete, irrelevant. If they continued the theatrical cut, they'd never be able to acknowledge Zoe's relationship with the new villain they set up in the extended cut, and if they continued after the extended cut, they'd never be able to bring in the returning characters from the first movie that they reintroduced as a plot twist in the theatrical cut. It's madness, and it has me wondering why they did it outside of, Easter eggs. This wasn't a matter of giving audiences the option of an extended version of the same story, more as the director intended it but had to be changed for general release. These two movies had different scenes, plots, endings, and some characters. And if you're like me and you didn't know that there were two movies and you went to see the sequel only to realize you'd watched the wrong one, this scenario hinges on them making a sequel, but the franchise is certainly profitable enough to expect one, so that would be such a piss off. You'd sit down like I did and have no idea what you're watching or how you missed all of this. Turning Tournament of Champions into essentially two different movies, one conclusive and one continuing, is both a ballsy and extremely risky move. As much as it seems a little crazy, a part of me thinks that this may also have been an excellent marketing strategy. If you watch the version of the movie that won't be used as a sequel, you're then obligated to go watch the other version. Even if you watch the correct version, knowing another one is out there that's so different is also intriguing and might spur you to watch the other one anyway. I am both baffled and interested in these production choices, and I can't tell if it's genius or madness. What do you think? Is this smart marketing or poor foresight? It could all seem like a moot point if they don't make a sequel, but at the same time, just having two versions of the same movie could spur a great confusion in movie reviewers that think they're talking about the same movie when really they absolutely are not. Let me know what you think about the two Tournament of Champion movies in the comments below. I'll be making a video inspired by the tweet I mentioned at the start of this video soon, but I felt it was important to address the fact that there are two Tournament of Champion movies of completely different quality before trying to discuss a single one of them in a comparison review. So keep an eye out for that. As this is the end of the video, I'd like to say thank you as always for watching.